Welcome to the Veil of Truth, your passport to the stories that matter globe showing Europe, Africa. I'm thrilled you're here. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from around the world. Chapter 1, Arrival at Fernwood Manor. A pall of mist clung to the rolling lawns of Fernwood Manor as the motorcar drew up to the sweeping gravel drive. Sunlight, timid and grey, filtered through the dawn haze, casting elongated shadows across the clipped yews and rose beds. Monsieur Hercule Poirot stepped lightly from the vehicle, his patent leather shoes making a crisp crack against the stones. He paused to survey the house, a grand, early Georgian pile of hunted stone, with tall sash windows staring like silent sentinels, and an arched portico that spoke of genteel welcome, yet, beneath its polished exterior, he sensed secrets awaiting illumination. Poirot adjusted his immaculate morning coat and pressed a gloved hand to his chest in polite salute as Mrs. Bradshaw, the housekeeper, hurried forward. She was a trim woman in her 50s, with steel-grey hair pulled into a tight chignon and eyes that darted nervously from Poirot to the manor's entrance. "Monsieur Poirot, thank you for arriving so promptly," she said, curtsying with such precision that the brass buttons on her uniform gleamed. "Sir Lionel awaits you in the dining room. If you please to follow me." "Je vows for mercy, madam," Poirot replied, allowing a small, courteous smile. He placed his suitcase by his side and followed her through a pair of heavy oak doors into the cool interior. The dining room was suffused with a gentle glow from tall leaded windows overlooking the rose garden. On a long mahogany table, breakfast was laid with military exactitude, silver coffeepots polished to a mirror finish, fine bone china cups edged with gilt, and crystal tumbler glasses that tinkled faintly at the slightest touch. Each napkin was folded into a perfect triangle, and an array of condiments stood in polished silver dishes. Seated at the head of the table was Sir Lionel Harrington, a distinguished man in his late 50s. His posture was upright, his dark moustache trimmed to a razor's edge, an echo, perhaps, of Poirot's own famed coiffure. Despite his dignified air, Poirot perceived a tension in Sir Lionel's shoulders and a fleeting tightness around his eyes. "Monsieur Poirot," Sir Lionel said, rising to greet the detective. "Thank you for coming. Pray, sit." He motioned to the empty chair on his right, and Poirot accepted, placing his hat and gloves neatly on the seat beside him. Around the table sat 4 others. Rosalind Harrington, Sir Lionel's only daughter, a young woman of 26 with rich auburn hair and a gentle profile. Her morning dress of dove-grey silk was simple yet elegant, a fine silver locket hung at her throat. Yet her skin was pale, and when she poured tea, her slender hand trembled ever so slightly, betraying nerves she strove to conceal. Mr. Clive Morton, the family solicitor, a heavy-set man in a dark suit whose lined face and steel-blue eyes suggested a mind constantly at work. He drummed a polished fingernail on the edge of his saucer, as though eager for this meeting to proceed without delay. Lady Beatrice Langford, a distant cousin, resplendent in rose-pink afternoon silk. Her jewel brooch caught the light as she turned her head, and her bright auburn hair was curled to perfection. She leaned forward, engaging Rosalind in low-voiced chatter that nevertheless carried a tinge of malice, gossip, perhaps. Dr. Evelyn Shaw, the family physician, seated at the far end, a composed woman in her early 30s, with spectacles balanced on her nose and a notebook perched on her lap. Her interest was clinical, her gaze assessing each character as though they were subjects in a medical case study. Poirot's dark eyes flicked from one face to another, taking in not just their clothing and expressions, but the minutiae, the crease at the corner of Lady Beatrice's mouth, the smudge of charcoal on Dr. Shaw's finger from last night's case notes, the slight scuff on Mr. Morton's left shoe, and the way Rosalind's clutch on her napkin betrayed her disquiet. Sir Lionel cleared his throat. "Monsieur, you know of our disturbances. First the steward's disappearance, then odd noises in the wing. I cannot proceed alone." I beg your counsel and your discretion. Poirot inclined his head. Sir Lionel, you have my word. Discretion and accuracy are the hallmarks of my work. But to begin, I must understand every detail, no matter how trivial it may seem. Madam Bradshaw, did anything unusual occur this morning outside the ordinary routine? Mrs. Bradshaw's eyelids fluttered as she recalled. Only the usual deliveries and post, monsieur. Though there was one small parcel for Miss Rosalind, delivered before 8. She took it upstairs without comment. She hesitated, then added, it was wrapped in brown paper, sealed with red wax. A red wax seal, a flourish at odds with the otherwise austere parcel. Poirot's little moustache twitched with interest. And did you see the courier? No, monsieur. He left immediately. Poirot turned to Rosalind. Might you enlighten us, Miss Harrington? Rosalind's cheeks reddened. It was from a friend in London, an artist acquaintance. He sent me some preliminary sketches for my portrait commission. Nothing more. Sketches, Poirot repeated, noting the faint smudge of charcoal on her fingertips. Of yourself, mademoiselle? Yes, she murmured, avoiding his gaze. And the red wax seal, was that customary between you? They always seal them so, she insisted, though her voice wavered. Poirot filed the detail away. Then, to the assembled company, he said, I should like to see the steward's quarters, the gardener's lodge, and this morning's parcel. If you will allow me, I will begin my examination at once. Sir Lionel granted his permission, exchanging a glance with Dr. Shaw that flickered with unspoken concern. Mrs. Bradshaw rose to summon servants. As the room emptied, Poirot remained, eyes fixed on the high mantelpiece clock whose pendulum swung with perfect regularity. On the sideboard, a small Victorian silver frame held a faded photograph, the steward, Mr. Jameson, standing stiffly beside Sir Lionel. Jameson's face was unreadable, no mirror for emotion, unlike the others around the table. Poirot's gaze lingered. There was significance in the absent expression, a puzzle piece yet to be placed. Beyond the windows, a thrush began its morning song, the first note echoing through the manor's hush. Poirot rose, picking up his cane. Everything in its place, yet nothing as it seems, he murmured to himself, pocketing a miniature pencil and pad. Now, let us commence. He stepped towards the doorway, pausing to observe the carved pattern on the oak floor, a faint scuff, barely visible, leading towards the east wing. A servant hurried past, eyes downcast. Poirot's little grey cells stirred to life. In a house of grandeur, he reflected aloud, it is often the smallest detail that reveals the greatest truths. And so, with the mellow light of summer filtering through stained glass and a hush of anticipation in every corridor, Hercule Poirot began his methodical exploration of Fernwood Manor, unaware, perhaps, of how swiftly danger and deception would follow in his wake. By the time the sun rose fully over the manor's turrets, the first threads of a cunningly woven mystery were already teasing themselves before his mind's eye, ready for him to unravel. Chapter 2. A shocking discovery. Late that afternoon, a restless hush settled over Fernwood Manor. The golden light through the leaded windows had warmed to a honeyed glow, and the servants moved silently along polished floors as though afraid to disturb the house's uneasy calm. Poirot, in pursuit of the steward's quarters and the gardener's lodge, had already inspected the east wing and dismissed the apparition of a burglary as a staged distraction. Now, he found himself drawn inexorably back toward the billiard room, guided by an instinct as sure as any clue. The billiard room lay at the far end of the corridor, its heavy door shut against intruders. Poirot paused before it, noting the faint pattern of scuffed carpet, a narrow path, as though someone had walked to the table and then retreated. He lifted his cane and tapped lightly on the solid oak panel, one tap, two taps, The room's silence answered him, punctuated only by the distant ticking of a grandfather clock. With a courteous push, Poirot entered. The afternoon sun slanted through tall mullioned windows, casting long bars of light across the deep green felt of the billiard table. On the floor lay a single white glove, soft, silk, and unmistakably feminine. Poirot stooped to examine it, noting the tiny embroidered initials, RH, in silver thread. He slipped it into a small evidence bag from his pocket. His eyes then traveled to the table itself. A crimson stain marring the otherwise immaculate cloth. He frowned, drew closer, and saw that it was not paint or wax, but blood. Poirot straightened, his demeanor calm but unyielding, and surveyed the rest of the room. Chairs were overturned, a cue rack lay askew, and in the hearth a half-burned log spilled sparks onto the hearthrug. Above the mantel hung the large portrait of Sir Lionel, his stern gaze overlooking the chaos. Poirot drew in a measured breath. "Mais oui," he murmured, "someone wished to send a message of terror. But messages are seldom as straightforward as they appear." He moved to the sideboard, where a small silver tray still held the remnants of afternoon tea, a china cup cracked at the rim, sugar cubes scattered like mounds of broken white, and a silver teaspoon stained with something dark. He rinsed the spoon in his glass of water and examined it. The handle bore a fingerprint, faint but unmistakable. Poirot tapped the glass with his cane, thoughtful. Fingerprint of the murderer? Or of the one who discovered the scene, he mused. Footsteps echoed in the corridor. Poirot turned to see Rosalind Harrington, her cheeks flushed with dread. She carried a small parcel, perhaps the same one from this morning, clutched to her chest. Her wide eyes took in the upheaval. "Mademoiselle," Poirot said gently, slipping the white glove into his breast pocket. "Pray, put that parcel down and tell me what you have witnessed." Rosalind set the parcel on a nearby console table, as though reluctant to release it from her grasp. I heard a scream," she stammered, voice trembling. "A moment ago. I ran to fetch Mrs. Bradshaw, but by the time we arrived, oh, Monsieur Poirot, what has happened?" "Something most regrettable," Poirot replied softly. "You heard a scream." "From whom, and at what time?" Rosalind swallowed, glancing at the ruined tea service. "About an hour ago, I think. I was in the drawing room reading letters. I heard a short, sharp cry, just a single sound, like a bird caught in a trap, then silence." She paused. "When I called out, there was no answer. Mrs. Bradshaw and I came here together, and we found this." Poirot nodded. "And you saw no one? No figure fleeing the scene? No sign of struggle beyond this room?" Rosalind bit her lip. "Only the orchestra of glass on the sideboard clinking. But no footsteps, no one running away." She brushed a trembling hand through her hair. "It is terrifying." "Indeed." Poirot retrieved his pocket watch, consulted it briefly, and murmured, "Time of death, perhaps 30 to 40 minutes past 4. He replaced the watch thoughtfully. "Might I ask, mademoiselle, who last used this room?" Rosalind looked pained. "I played a game with Mr. Morton yesterday afternoon, just a friendly match. We finished around 5. After that, no one came in until I returned from the morning's walk and found the door locked. I let myself in with my latchkey." Poirot's brow furrowed. "So Mr. Morton and you were the last recorded occupants. Then Mrs. Bradshaw tidied the room, and you fetched her when you heard the scream?" Rosalind nodded. "Yes." "Did your brother lock the door behind him when he left last evening?" Rosalind flushed. "My brother? My brother isn't here." Poirot's moustache twitched. "Forgive me, my mistake." He turned his gaze to the door. "Locked from within, yes? Did Mrs. Bradshaw try the handle when she came?" "I believe so," Rosalind replied. "It opened for us both." Poirot's mind raced. A locked door that opens easily from without, no footprints in dew-laden grass, no witness to a fleeing body. The white glove offered a personal touch, someone knew Rosalind's initials. And now the blood on the table. He pressed his fingertips to the felt, then touched the portrait above the mantel. Tiny flecks of blood had splattered upward, as though the fatal blow was delivered there. "Come," Poirot said, gesturing to Rosalind. "Let us reenact the final moments. There is order in chaos, mademoiselle, if one but knows where to look." Rosalind, still pale, nodded and moved to the side of the table opposite him. Poirot took position, his back to the mantel, and instructed her in a calm voice. "Imagine you sit here and deliver that fatal stroke with a formidable instrument." He tapped the table edge gently with his cane, pointing to the charred log in the hearth. "Perhaps a poker?" "No, too clumsy." "Look at the scene, what tool lies at hand?" Rosalind's gaze flicked to the cue rack. A single cue lay on the floor, its tip worn. "The cue," she whispered. "Exactly," Poirot said. "A slender but solid instrument, easy to raise and strike quickly." He stepped forward, demonstrating how a blow could be delivered in a single arc. One need not aim for the heart. A blow delivered here, at the upper back, could pierce deeply. He tapped the felt beside the bloodstain, then continued the motion. The force pivots the victim forward into the table, fracture and clot alike halting life in an instant. Rosalind watched, wide-eyed. But, who would do such a thing? In time, mademoiselle, the answer will present itself. Poirot's gaze softened. "Now, tell me, what of Miss Beatrice and Dr. Shaw at this hour?" Rosalind blinked, considering. "Lady Beatrice was in the drawing-room, I believe, speaking with my father about the upcoming luncheon. Dr. Shaw was in the library consulting medical journals." "Alone?" Poirot pressed. "Yes." Rosalind's voice quivered. "I did not think much of it at the time, but now." A sudden knock at the door drew their attention. Mrs. Bradshaw entered, carrying a small tray. On it lay a torn piece of paper, scrawled in haste. "The truth lies beneath silence." Poirot took the note with gloved fingers and read aloud. An ominous message. But whose handwriting? And what silence is meant? He folded the paper carefully. "We shall preserve this." "Thank you, madam." Mrs. Bradshaw curtsied and left. Poirot regarded Rosalind with earnest intensity. "You see, mademoiselle, the murderer seeks to frighten us, to divert our attention. But terror is a tool as any other. The true evidence lies in how that fear is manufactured." He indicated the white glove in his pocket. "And in what is left behind." Rosalind shivered. "What are we to do, monsieur? There is panic in the house already." "Nous gardons notre calme," Poirot said gently. "We proceed methodically. I will send for Lady Beatrice and Dr. Shaw. They must account for their whereabouts. And you, mademoiselle, should remain safe in the drawing-room." He paused. "But first, I must examine the body." Rosalind's face blanched anew. "You will not leave him alone?" He is Mr. Morton." Poirot inclined his head. "Yes. His body must be preserved in situ until the coroner arrives. I will return in a moment." He tapped his cane on the floor, leaving behind an aura of resolute calm. As Rosalind fled the room to gather herself, Poirot knelt by the billiard table. He placed a small chalk disc around the bloodstain, then examined the hem of the green felt. A torn sliver of fabric caught on his fingertips, fine silk, similar in weave to the glove. He bagged the fragment, then stood and surveyed the scene in its totality, the overturned chairs, the charred hearth, the blood-splattered portrait, the cryptic note, the forgotten glove, and the slender billiard cue resting against the cue rack. In that moment, Poirot's mind orchestrated each fragment into a nascent theory. He brushed a stray hair from his forehead. "Mon Dieu," he murmured. "The game is afoot, and the stakes are life and death." Thus, as the afternoon light waned and shadows gathered around the table, the body of Mr. Clive Morton awaited its inquest, and Fernwood Manor braced itself for the meticulous unravelling that only Hercule Poirot could provide. The first reveal had stripped away innocence, and the second would demand a sharper eye. But for now, in the hush of the billiard room, the detective's little grey cells were to life, poised to illuminate the darkest corners of this deadly game. Chapter 3: The Methodical Inquiry. When the coroner's motorcar departed under the low, grey sky, a charged stillness settled over Fernwood Manor. The servants, pale and hushed, moved like phantoms about their tasks. The windows, heavy with drawn curtains, allowed only a faint light to filter through. In the drawing-room, Hercule Poirot stood before a low table, upon which lay the white glove, the scrap of silk from the billiard table, and the torn note bearing the cryptic injunction, "The truth lies beneath silence." He picked up each item in turn and examined it with his trademark precision, the glove's embroidered initials, R.H., the delicate weave of the silk fragment, matching Rosalind's gown, the uneven script of the note, its uneven spacing betraying haste. Then he arranged them methodically on a silver tray, his little grey cells already turning. "Madame Bradshaw," Poirot intoned, "I require you to assemble the household in the library immediately. We shall conduct a proper inquiry." The housekeeper's eyes widened, but she offered no objection. With a soft curtsy, she departed, her footsteps echoing down the corridor. Poirot tucked the tray under his arm and followed her, cane tapping in measured cadence. In the panelled library, 4 figures awaited him: Lady Beatrice Langford, resplendent despite the sombre occasion; Dr. Evelyn Shaw, calm yet watchful; Sir Lionel Harrington, his stern facade now creased with grief; and Rosalind, her once elegant gown rumpled, hands clasped tightly in her lap. Poirot placed the tray on a small side table. "Miss Amis," he began, his voice gentle yet firm, "we stand at a crucial juncture. The loss of Mr. Morton demands not only justice but clarity. I must ask you each, in turn, to recount your movements and any observations you made yesterday and today. Please speak openly, concealment serves only the guilty." He turned first to Lady Beatrice. She sat straight, her gloved hands folded demurely. "Lady Beatrice," Poirot said, "where were you at the time of the unfortunate event in the billiard room?" "I was in the conservatory," she replied smoothly. "I needed a moment's respite among the lilies and ferns. I arrived there around 3:30 to admire the new water feature. I stayed until nearly 4 o'clock, when I heard no sounds of disturbance and returned to the drawing room." "Did anyone accompany you?" Poirot asked. She shook her head. "No one." The conservatory was empty. Poirot nodded, his gaze unfaltering. "And did you see anyone entering or leaving the billiard room?" Lady Beatrice hesitated a fraction. "No. But I did glimpse Mr. Morton earlier, through the corridor window. He was alone, moving towards the east wing. He bore a ledger in his hand." "A ledger?" Poirot echoed. "Interesting." He made a note. "Thank you, Lady Beatrice." Next, he addressed Dr. Shaw. The physician's eyes met his steadily. "Dr. Shaw," your movements yesterday were uninterrupted by calls or visits. Quite so, she answered. As my duties required, I spent the afternoon in the library reviewing case notes for Lady Beatrice's mother's treatment. My consultation lasted until nearly 3:30, after which I walked the grounds for fresh air. I returned around 4:45, prepared tea for Mr. Morton and myself, and then continued my notes until tea was served to the rest of the household. He prepared tea with you? Poirot queried. Dr. Shaw inclined her head. He joined me briefly. He seemed anxious, his brow was furrowed. He mentioned he had urgent concerns to raise with Sir Lionel. Then he took the tray and left for the billiard room. Alone? Poirot pressed. Alone. He jotted this down. Then, turning to Sir Lionel himself, he asked the most delicate question of all. Sir Lionel, where were you when Mr. Morton met his fate? Sir Lionel's gaze fell to his clasped hands. I was in my study, preparing letters. I heard nothing, no cry, no sudden noise. Morton had leave of me until tea. I assumed he would join us promptly. When Lady Beatrice came to tell me of the commotion, I found the butler and Bradshaw standing by that accursed door. He broke off, swallowing. Sir Lionel, Poirot said softly, is there anything you omitted to tell us? Sir Lionel's eyes met Poirot's with a flicker of shame. Only. Morton and I had a disagreement yesterday. He accused me of malfeasance in managing the estate's finances. Poirot raised an eyebrow. Indeed? Miss Beatrice mentioned a ledger. Was that his evidence? Sir Lionel nodded. Yes. He believed I had diverted company funds. It was absurd, of course. I dismissed his claims. He brushed his hand across his forehead. I regret our harsh words. Poirot made another note. His eyes then turned to Rosalind, the final piece in this circle. Miss Harrington, you have endured much today. Pray tell me again of your movements yesterday and this morning. Rosalind's lips trembled, but she spoke steadily. Yesterday morning, I spent an hour painting in the East Wing Gallery. At noon, I lunched in the dining room with Father and Mr. Morton. After lunch, I retired to my rooms to write letters. I received a parcel, some sketches from a London friend. I examined them, then set them on my desk. I went for tea in the drawing room, and afterwards, I sought Grace notes in the piano before returning to my writing. And on the grounds? Poirot asked. I walked in the rose garden after tea, round 4:45. I paused by the sundial, watching the bees and listening to the breeze. Then I returned indoors and entered the billiard room, locked, as I found, using my latchkey. Poirot studied her, noting the slight quiver in her voice. You found the door locked? Rosalind nodded. Yes. I used my key, turned it, and opened the door. Then I screamed. He leaned forward. Miss Harrington, did you see any footprints outside the window? She pressed her lips together. No. The dew was undisturbed. A hush fell. Poirot rose, moving to the hearth where the black poker lay. He picked it up gingerly, eyes narrowing. Observe, he said, tapping the timber mantelshelf. The smear of paint on the letter opener indicated someone had recently retouched the east wing decoration. He indicated the smudge of white on the poker's handle. This poker bears the same trace. But the poker belongs to no one here. It is part of the equipment in Mr. Jameson's lodge, used for the fireplace there. Who had reason to go to the gardener's lodge this morning? All eyes turned to Mrs. Bradshaw, who had remained silent. Her breathing quickened. Poirot's gaze held hers. Madam Bradshaw, he said gently, you oversee the staff. Tell me, did you visit the gardener's lodge today? The housekeeper swallowed. I did, monsieur. I went to collect logs for the drawing-room fire. I paused to speak to Mr. Jameson through the window. He seemed well. I returned to the house at 3:30. And did you handle this poker? Poirot asked, holding it aloft. She shook her head. No, I fetched logs and went back. I did not touch the poker. Poirot replaced the poker on the tray. Yet someone smothered the poker's handle in paint, fresh paint. He tapped the poker's head. You see the smudge? It is the same paint used in the East Wing, not in the lodge. Who else has paintbrush in hand? A faint glance passed between Sir Lionel and Rosalind. Rosalind's cheeks flamed. Poirot's gaze cut to her. Miss Harrington, do you paint besides canvases? She hesitated. In my youth, I practiced on walls. But I have not touched a brush to these walls for years. And yet you are the only person here with a brush to spare, Poirot observed. This morning you handled paint in the East Wing. If one wished to leave a false trail, he broke off, letting the implication hang. Lady Beatrice gasped. Sir Lionel's fists clenched. Dr. Shaw's expression remained serene. Mrs. Bradshaw's lips trembled. Rosalind stared at Poirot, horrified. Poirot laid out the objects on the tray: glove, silk fragment, poker, note. Each item speaks, and lies. The glove tells us a woman was present, the silk fragment confirms that. The poker tells us someone staged a break-in, the note tells us of fear. But which fear is genuine? He turned to Dr. Shaw. You saw Mr. Morton leave your study with tea, yet you recall no strange sounds. Dr. Shaw inclined her head. No, but the window was open. Perhaps there was a draught. Indeed, Poirot said. But no footprints outside, due undisturbed. So the murderer never left by that window. He faced the entire company. We are confronted by someone among us who used the billiard cue, the poker, and the borrowed paintbrush to misdirect us. Yet the true instrument was the letter opener, found removed from its tray in that very room. He paused. For now, we have gathered statements. Each of you will remain in your rooms, and no one must leave the manor. Tomorrow morning, I shall resume my inquiries. Until then, I beg you all, reflect upon your own actions, and allow your consciences to guide your recollections. Sir Lionel rose, his face drawn. Lady Beatrice smoothed her gown, Dr. Shaw collected her papers, Rosalind sank back with a shudder, and Mrs. Bradshaw curtsied and withdrew. Left alone, Poirot surveyed the tray of implements. He lifted the broken note. Beneath silence, he murmured. But the silence is what we must shatter. He walked to the window and gazed out at the rose garden, now dusky with gathering clouds. The dew-covered petals glistened, innocent of human guilt. Yet within these walls, deceit and ambition had conspired to end a life. Poirot closed his eyes, drawing on his unrivaled powers of deduction. The threads of motive, means, and opportunity had been laid bare, yet the pattern remained elusive. He opened his eyes and smiled faintly. In the morning, he said to the empty room, the first rays of truth will illuminate these shadows. Until then, I shall allow my little grey cells to rest, for even the most vigilant detective requires repose. Outside, a solitary thrush sang its evening song, unaware of the human drama unfolding within Fernwood Manor's ancient walls. And as the first soft raindrops began to fall, the chamber door clicked behind Poirot, sealing the secrets of Chapter 3 until dawn. Chapter 4, clues and contradictions. Dawn broke over Fernwood Manor in a veil of pale mist that seemed to hang perpetually between despair and hope. Hercule Poirot rose with the first light, mindful that every hour now counted in the unraveling of the mystery. He dressed with meticulous care, crisp white shirt, dark morning coat, gleaming boots, his appearance betraying none of the restless energy within. By breakfast, he was ready to re-examine the scenes of crime, certain that fresh scrutiny would reveal the slender threads that until now had eluded detection. The billiard room's secret. The billiard room door swung open at Poirot's quiet knock. The green baize had been replaced overnight, yet the chalk circle marking the fatal spot remained. Poirot knelt and traced its edge, discovering a near-invisible rivulet of white paint, so thin it seemed a trick of the morning light. The paint matched exactly the hue used in the East Wing's recent decorative repairs, a detail Mrs. Bradshaw insisted no one else had touched. He rose and surveyed the room anew. The portrait of Sir Lionel hung slightly askew, its bottom edge dipped 2 inches lower on the right. There, too, were flecks of paint across the gilded frame, as though someone had bumped a brush against it. Poirot's little grey cells stirred. A staged break-in would require a picture to be disturbed, yet the culprit had done so only half-heartedly, leaving blatant traces. At the far corner, below the cue rack, Poirot found another clue, a tiny scrap of linen caught in the rack's brass fittings. He plucked it free, a fragment of a fine muslin blouse, embroidered at the hem with silver thread. The initials, LH, danced in metallic stitches. Yet Rosalind's blouse had no embroidery, Lady Beatrice's lace was of a different weave. It pointed rather to Dr. Shaw, whose evening gown that night had indeed featured silver filigree. 2. The East Wing Gallery. From the billiard room, Poirot proceeded down the corridor to the East Wing Gallery. The false brightness of the freshly painted walls still shone, betraying their recent retouching. Poirot crouched by the skirting board where the paint ran thicker and observed, at eye level, 2 sets of smudges, charcoal from an artist's pencil and a thin black line from lead graphite. He smiled to himself. Rosalind's sketches, he knew, were drawn in charcoal, not graphite. Above the skirting, nestled behind a canvas, he found a torn corner of ledger paper, its jagged edge stained with what looked like black ink. The fragment bore a string of figures, £2 300, and the 3rd of April 25, scrawled in a spidery hand. Poirot tucked it into his notebook. Undeniably financial, and recent, he murmured. Someone hid incriminating evidence here. He tested the fresh paint with his gloved fingertip and confirmed it was barely dry. Whoever had left the smudge must have passed through moments ago. The gallery offered no other footprints, the hardwood gleamed as though untouched. How then had the intruder departed? Poirot noted a faint smear of mud at the window ledge, odd, since outside the dew was still undisturbed. A clue, he decided, that involved quick entrance and even swifter exit. 3. The polished silver tray. Back in the dining room, Poirot requested Mrs. Bradshaw's silver tea tray, a routine piece, yet vital. He examined its surface under a magnifying glass and discovered a microscopic abrasion at the rim, matching the shape of a billiard cue's metal ferrule. He realized that Mrs. Bradshaw, when tidying yesterday, must have absent-mindedly set the tray down on the cue before removing it. This contradicted her earlier assertion that she polished the tray in the morning before any disturbance. Confronting the housekeeper, Poirot spoke gently but firmly. "Madam, you said you polished this tray before breakfast. Yet here is the mark of a Q-tip, after breakfast began." She wilted, unable to maintain her composure. Under his calm scrutiny, she admitted she entered the billiard room for tea preparations just before Morton's body was found. "I did not, I could not, know he lay there," she sobbed. Poirot nodded, not judging, merely noting that her presence there overlapped with the time of death. 4. The gardener's lodge re-examined. At midday, Poirot visited the gardener's lodge under pretext of inspecting the fireplace tools once more. Mr. Jameson, pale and exhausted, watched as Poirot ran his finger along the handle of the iron poker. "No paint here, sir," Jameson insisted. Poirot agreed, then pointed to a tiny chip on the wood, the exact fragment matching the billiard cue's chipped butt. "Yet yesterday," Poirot said softly, "this poker accompanied the billiard cue to that room, was mispainted there, and then returned." Jameson's brow furrowed. "Impossible, sir." Poirot smiled. "But nothing is impossible, only improbable. The poker was borrowed to plant paint in the billiard room, an attempt to link the gardener to the scene. But whoever borrowed it then returned it, feigning innocence. V. Interrogations and alibis. In the library that afternoon, Poirot assembled the household once more. Sir Lionel's face was drawn, Rosalind's eyes were ringed with fatigue, Lady Beatrice maintained a brittle poise, Dr. Shaw's expression was steely calm, Mrs. Bradshaw trembled. One by one, Poirot revisited their accounts. He pointed out that Rosalind's charcoal residue in the gallery contradicted her claim to have painted only in her studio. He noted Lady Beatrice's lace gloves bore no paint, yet a drop had fallen on the billiard table. He asked Dr. Shaw to explain the linen fragment from her evening dress and the ledger scrap hidden in the gallery. And he reminded Sir Lionel that the financial figures indicated payments made on the 3rd of April, mere weeks ago. Each person shifted under Poirot's unwavering gaze. Pieces fell into place. The ledger revealed Sir Lionel's clandestine loans to Morton, the muslin fragment pointed to Dr. Shaw's evening visit, the tray mark placed Mrs. Bradshaw at the scene, the paint smears linked Lady Beatrice's interruption of her afternoon walk. And Rosalind's charcoal smudges betrayed her unspoken presence in the gallery at the moment the ledger was hidden. 6. The puzzle's center. As evening crept in, Poirot withdrew to his room, where he laid out the day's discoveries. Paint smears on the letter opener and gallery skirting, matching the east wing retouch. Muslin fragment bearing LH, pointing to Dr. Shaw. Ledger scrap with £2 300, indicating financial motive. Silver tray mark placing Mrs. Bradshaw in the billiard room shortly before discovery. Charcoal residue linking Rosalind to the gallery concealment. Chipped cue fragment found on the lodge's poker. He studied the alignment of these clues. The crime had been staged to implicate housekeeper, daughter, Lady Beatrice, and gardener, yet all trails converged on Sir Lionel's concealed embezzlement. One thread, however, remained unwoven, the personal touch of the white glove, embroidered with R.H. Poirot smiled as he folded his notebook. "The final contradiction waits in plain sight," he whispered. "Tomorrow, the truth will emerge from beneath the silence." Outside, the manor lay hushed under a slate-grey sky. Within, its secrets trembled, poised on the brink of revelation. And Poirot, master of method and observation, felt the satisfaction of a closing circle. The pieces were aligned, the contradictions resolved. Now, only the final stroke of genius remained. Chapter 5, Unraveling Motives. The morning light filtered weakly through the mullioned windows of Fernwood Manor, casting a pale glow on the polished oaken floors. A hush pervaded the corridors, each footfall echoed like a whispered confession. Hercule Poirot, ever precise, arrived in the gallery at precisely 9 o'clock, cane in hand and notebook at the ready. Today's task was less an examination of physical evidence and more an exploration of the hidden currents of motive, resentment, and fear that ran beneath the genteel surface of the household. 1. A gathering of suspects. In the library, the four principal figures awaited him: Sir Lionel, draped in a sombre black coat; Lady Beatrice, slender and composed; Dr. Evelyn Shaw, serene in her professional calm, and Rosalind Harrington, pale but resolute. Poirot took his place at the head of the long mahogany table, his little grey cells poised for action. "Miss Ames," he began, "we have seen how actions can deceive, how clues can mislead. Today, I invite you to share not merely what you did, but why you did it. Motive, Miss Ames, is the heart of crime." He tapped his cane gently. "Let us begin with financial entanglements. 2. The ledger's secret." Poirot laid out the scrap of ledger paper found behind the canvas in the East Wing, £2 300 the 3rd of April 25. He looked first at Sir Lionel. "This amount, sir, was paid to you by Mr. Morton. Would you care to explain its purpose?" Sir Lionel's face darkened. "Monsieur, I admit I borrowed funds from Clive to improve the estate's failing finances. The repayment schedule was agreed verbally, no need for formal record." He paused. "But when he pressed for a written agreement, I refused. I feared exposure." Poirot nodded. "And did this fear become desperation?" He fixed Sir Lionel with a calm gaze. "Did you view Mr. Morton as a threat?" Sir Lionel swallowed. "I admit, I felt cornered. But I would never harm him." 3. Loyalty and betrayal. Poirot next turned to Lady Beatrice. "You mentioned overhearing an argument between Morton and Sir Lionel. What did you hear?" Lady Beatrice smoothed her gloves. "Only raised voices, monsieur. Lionel furious that Clive threatened to involve the bank. I feared Lionel might lose everything. But I did not intervene." She glanced at Rosalind. "Nor did I tell her." A flicker passed across Poirot's face. "Fear can coerce collusion, mademoiselle. Yet silence can also be betrayal." 4. Professional pride. Dr. Shaw cleared her throat. "Clive had criticized my professional judgment in Lady Beatrice's mother's case. He claimed I endangered her health by withholding certain treatments. I admit I disliked his arrogance. He bullied me in council meetings. But I sought only to defend my reputation, not to kill." Poirot made a subtle note of the stiffness in her shoulders. "Defending one's honor is noble. Yet jealousy and pride can lead to dark deeds." 5. Filial devotion. Finally, he addressed Rosalind. She clasped her hands tightly. "My father and Mr. Morton argued over my future. Clive believed I lacked talent and would never succeed as an artist. He said so to me, harshly. I resented him, yet I loved my father. He tried to protect me. I found the ledger fragment and knew my art sponsor's payments were in jeopardy. I panicked." She looked down. "I hid the paper so that father would have time to arrange alternative support. But I did not kill Clive." 6. Intersecting motives. Poirot leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Each of you had reason to oppose Mr. Morton. Sir Lionel feared public disgrace, Lady Beatrice feared the collapse of the family's social standing, Dr. Shaw feared injury to her career, and Rosalind feared loss of her artistic future. But motive alone does not make a murderer." He tapped the ledger fragment. "Consider the amount, £2,300. In April, that sum would nearly cover the manor's annual maintenance. Yet only Clive and Sir Lionel knew the precise figure. Yet Lady Beatrice spoke of overheard figures of speech, not numbers. Dr. Shaw saw numbers only in medical statistics. But Rosalind, an artist accustomed to commissions, would understand the value of a precise sum." He paused for effect. "Thus, the concept that paid the debt appeals to none but two, Sir Lionel and his daughter." Sir Lionel shifted uneasily, Rosalind's head lifted, eyes uncertain. 7. The painted distraction. Poirot turned to another puzzle, the paint smears on the poker and gallery skirting. These smears were intended to implicate the painter, yes? Who would wish to divert suspicion onto Mrs. Bradshaw, and who had access to the paintbrush? Lady Beatrice waved a hand. I passed through that gallery, but I did not paint. Dr. Shaw's usually composed face betrayed no change. Rosalind spoke at last. I was the one who retouched the gallery. I assisted the decorator last week. The paint used matches my brushes. She looked to her father. Father knew I helped. Poirot inclined his head. Indeed. The painted poker was planted to simulate misdirection. But the forger did not realize you would identify the paint. A subtle misstep. 8. The note and the glove. Next, Poirot examined the torn note, the truth lies beneath silence, and the white silk glove. The note's handwriting betrays an educated hand, one accustomed to flourish. And the glove's initials, R.H., belong to Miss Harrington. He held the glove aloft. Gasps rippled around the table. Monsieur, it is mine, Rosalind confessed, voice quivering. I discovered that identical glove beneath my easel in the gallery. I placed it in the billiard room to distract suspicion from the ledger. She looked to Sir Lionel. I thought I could recover the ledger, but I became frightened. I left the glove, hoping to buy time. 9. The fatal encounter. Poirot's gaze locked on Sir Lionel. And when Clive discovered the ledger, confrontation ensued. Sir Lionel closed his eyes. He came to my study at 4 o'clock accusing me. I tried to calm him, but he would not relent. He lunged for the letter opener on my desk. In the scuffle, it turned. He fell. I ran from the room in horror. He looked at his daughter. My darling, I should have called for help. Rosalind wept silently. 10. The masterstroke. Poirot stood. You see, Miss Amis, the truth is seldom direct. Father and daughter conspired, one to protect, one to preserve. But the dagger was unintended. He laid out the sequence. Rosalind hid the ledger to protect her father's reputation. She planted the glove and note to distract inquiry. Clive Morton confronted Sir Lionel upon discovering the ledger. In the ensuing struggle, the letter opener delivered the fatal wound. Sir Lionel and Rosalind staged the break-in with the poker and cue, hoping to implicate others. He addressed the grieving Sir Lionel with compassion. Your actions, though misguided, sprang from love and fear. The law may judge harshly, but your conscience must bear the heaviest burden. 11. Aftermath and resolution. As the household reeled from the revelation, Dr. Shaw and Lady Beatrice exchanged glances of relief and sorrow. Mrs. Bradshaw wept quietly in a corner. Rosalind sank to her knees beside her father, remorse etched on her face. Poirot gathered his coat. Justice will take its course. But let us remember that love, twisted by fear, can become a catalyst for tragedy. He paused at the door. Tomorrow, I shall prepare my report. Until then, Miss Amis, reflect upon your own hearts. May your future deeds be guided by truth, and not by the shadows of silence. With that, Hercule Poirot departed, leaving Fernwood Manor to its grief and to the slow unraveling of a father's and daughter's terrible secret. The corridors seemed emptier, the walls more grievous, yet within the hush lay the promise of clarity, and the faint hope that, even in tragedy, the human heart can find redemption. Chapter 6. The Red Herrings Multiply. By mid-afternoon, Fernwood Manor's atmosphere had grown taut with unease. Dark clouds gathered above the estate, and rumbling thunder heralded an approaching storm. Inside, Poirot moved through the corridors like a conductor seeking discordant notes in a symphony. He resolved that before the night fell, he must test each theory against fresh evidence and uncover the false trails deliberately laid by the true culprit. A. The vanishing ledger. Poised in the library, Poirot examined Sir Lionel's sturdy desk, where the genuine ledger had been stored. Now, only an empty groove remained where it once lay. He tapped the surface thoughtfully. This morning, Dr. Shaw admitted discovering a fragment of that ledger tucked in the gallery, yet the full volume had vanished. He summoned Dr. Shaw quietly to the desk. "Tell me, Doctor, what did you do with the ledger when you found it?" Dr. Shaw's calm mask slipped for a moment. "Monsieur, I feared the scandal. I placed it in my satchel and intended to return it to you discreetly." Poirot raised a brow. "Did you? Yet the satchel is here on your chair, and the ledger is not within." He opened the bag and revealed only notebooks and spectacles. "You returned it, but to whom?" Dr. Shaw swallowed. I handed it to Mrs. Bradshaw for safekeeping." Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Ah. And Mrs. Bradshaw?" He sent for the housekeeper, who admitted that Lady Beatrice had asked to see it, for guidance. When Lady Beatrice fetched it, she supposedly glanced at a few pages, then resealed and returned it, or so she said. The ledger's disappearance, Poirot noted, was a clever misdirection tying motive to each character, solicitor, doctor, housekeeper, cousin, yet enabling the real murderer to act unnoticed. B. The misdirected footprints. As the rain began to patter against the windows, Poirot stood in the conservatory, surveying the mosaic-tiled floor. Yesterday, Lady Beatrice claimed she had crossed this room to admire the lilies. Now, he inspected the subtle smudges around her boots. He knelt, tracing a damp outline, clay from the rose garden mixed with water from an upturned watering can. He summoned Lady Beatrice. "Madam, you told me you paused here at 3:30 yesterday. Yet the clay on your boots matches not the garden, but the path by the gardener's lodge." He pointed to the tile. "You passed through the lodge grounds, but you denied it." Lady Beatrice's composure cracked. "I was there," she admitted. "Clive Morton had sent me a note requesting my counsel on his dispute with Sir Lionel. I meant only to speak kindly, nothing more." Poirot nodded. The false trail of footprints had been intended to involve the gardener and housekeeper, but Lady Beatrice's unscheduled visit revealed her acquaintance with Morton, and perhaps a sharper motive, ambition to influence family affairs. See, the cracked teacup. In the dining room, a solitary teacup with a fine crack in its rim caught Poirot's eye. He recalled seeing it before the murder, yet he had assumed its damage irrelevant. Now, he lifted it and held it to the light, revealing an almost invisible line in the porcelain. He fetched Rosalind. "Mademoiselle, this cup belonged to your set, did it not?" Rosalind's pupils contracted. "Yes, but I did not notice the crack until this morning." "With good reason," Poirot murmured. "This cup was used to test poison." He tapped the handle. "See these tiny pockmarks? Acid erosion. Someone sought to dissolve evidence of tampering. The poison test was aborted, but the attempt was made." Rosalind's hands trembled. I never meant. I only wanted to scare him." Poirot regarded her with pity. Fear can be a potent tool, yet dangerous when misapplied. D. The garden's silent witness. Leaving the manor's warmth, Poirot strode beneath dripping eaves to the rose garden. The blooms, battered by rain, drooped as though tormented. He paused at the sundial, where yesterday Rosalind claimed she had stood. The pedestal bore fresh scratches, incongruous with normal wear. He knelt to examine them, jagged gouges, as though made by a sharp instrument. He tapped the sundial's disc. It wobbled slightly. Someone had loosened its fastenings, perhaps to conceal or reveal something beneath. Bringing Mrs. Bradshaw and Sir Lionel to the spot, Poirot demonstrated how a hand could slip beneath the dial's base. Gouges matched the tines of Lady Beatrice's crochet hook, a slender implement capable of prying. Lady Beatrice's gasp echoed. "I ask only for beauty in my garden, monsieur." "But beauty need not be a pretext for subterfuge," Poirot replied softly. The false confession. As twilight fell, the household gathered once more in the drawing room. The storm's thunder trembled through the panes. Poirot addressed them calmly. "I have observed today the cunning threads woven to misdirect us. Yet one final confession must be tested." He turned to Dr. Shaw. "Doctor, yesterday you admitted handling the ledger. But you also claimed to have sent for Mr. Morton's medical case notes afterward. None were fetched. Instead, you returned here swiftly." Dr. Shaw's fingers twitched. I misremembered." "Might one misremember to hide a darker motive?" Poirot asked. "Your resentment of Morton's arrogance was known. A false confession might draw guilt upon yourself, clearing the true criminal." Dr. Shaw bowed her head. "I confess only to error, monsieur." Poirot nodded. The false confession, like the painted poker, was a ruse to pin blame on her professional pride. The pearl-white paint. Returning indoors, Poirot collected the poker, the cue, and the letter opener. He placed them on a silver tray. Examined closely, he invited the group. Under lamplight, each bore traces of the pearl-white paint, yet each showed a different consistency: thick smears on the poker, thin flecks on the cue, and powdered residue on the handle of the opener. He demonstrated a deliberate daub on the poker to implicate the gardener, a careless brush on the cue to involve Lord Beatrice, and a crushed residue on the letter opener, delivered by a hand that had wiped away more than painted. "Observe," Poirot said, using a magnifying glass. "The residue on the opener smudges in one direction, toward the initials IH. The final contact with the victim was made after the owner of that glove handled the weapon." Gasps followed. Each red herring had been dispelled by subtle variations in paint. The web of deceit. As the clock chimed 10, Poirot gathered the suspects in the library one last time. He recounted each misdirection. The ledger's disappearance framed doctor, housekeeper, and cousin. The misdirected footprints implicated gardener and cousin. The cracked teacup suggested a poisoning attempt by daughter. The loosened sundial pointed to cousin's meddling. The false confession aimed at the doctor's arrogance. The painted tool scattered suspicion among all. He paused, letting the weight of each clue, and its contradiction, sink in. "Miss Amis," he concluded, "the murderer has crafted a tapestry of half-truths to obscure one thread, the white glove, bearing the initials IH, which touched the letter opener last. All else, paint, footprints, confessions, were whispers of deception." The storm's revelation. Outside, a fierce bolt of lightning illuminated the library through the window panes. Thunder followed, shaking the glass. In that flash, Rosalind's face, pale and resolute, came into stark relief. Poirot turned to her. "Mademoiselle Harrington," he said gently, "you sought to protect your father by hiding the ledger. You planted the glove, the note, the paint, the poison plot, to frighten, not to kill. But when Clive Morton discovered your secret, events spiraled beyond your control. You did not strike the fatal blow, but you set the stage." Rosalind's breath caught. Sir Lionel rose beside her, grief and pride mingling in his eyes. Poirot addressed Sir Lionel. "And you, monsieur, in fear of ruin, grabbed the letter opener in defense. The final tragedy was born of love and desperation. The storm raged outside as father and daughter stood intertwined in guilt and sorrow. A night of reckoning. As the household reeled from the revelations, Poirot retired to his room, his little grey cells at rest. The red herrings lay scattered like autumn leaves in the storm's wake, each dismissed by precise observation. In the quiet, he penned his notes, already beginning to compose his final summation. Outside, the rain sluiced against the windows, washing away footprints from the path. But within Fernwood Manor, the stains of human folly would long endure, until justice, tempered by mercy, took its course at dawn. And so, with the storm's fury spent, the house settled into tense anticipation, poised for the final act of Poirot's masterful unraveling. Chapter 7, A Moment of Peril. Night had fallen over Fernwood Manor like a velvet curtain, pierced only by the pale glow of a waning moon. Within the grand house, every lamp had been lit, yet the corridors remained cloaked in shadows that flickered and danced as servants hurried to their duties. Hercule Poirot, his mind restless with the day's revelations, chose to wander the corridors alone, seeking the last vestiges of evidence before the household retired for the night. He passed beneath portraits of stern ancestors whose painted eyes seemed to follow his progress. He paused at the library door, its glass panels reflecting his silhouette, and recalled the ledger's malicious absence. Determined to retrieve the ledger once and for all, he moved toward Mrs. Bradshaw's sitting room, where he believed the housekeeper had secreted the volume earlier that afternoon. Reaching the sitting room, Poirot found its door slightly ajar. He pushed it gently and entered. The fire in the grate danced low, casting an amber glow on the polished mahogany tea table. On it lay the satchel Dr. Shaw had forgotten earlier, and beside it, resting on a small silver tray, was the missing ledger, its binding cracked from hurried reopening. Poirot drew a sharp breath and approached. "Ah, there we are," he murmured, lifting the ledger with white-gloved care. He thumbed the cover, feeling the rough indentation where the family crest was embossed. The ledger was heavy with damning entries, and its return to his safekeeping brought him one step closer to the truth, and to ensuring that no one could tamper with it further. Just as he closed the ledger and tucked it beneath his arm, a soft creak sounded behind him. Poirot froze. The fire's crackle seemed amplified in the silence. He turned, eyes narrowing, to see a figure hurrying toward the window, a woman's figure, shrouded in a long coat, hands raised as if to steady herself on the sill. By the starlight, her features were indistinct, but her posture betrayed panic. "Monsieur Poirot," she whispered in a strained voice. "You must not hold that, you mustn't." She stopped abruptly, as though remembering where she stood. Poirot advanced, voice calm but insistent. "Madam, I beg your pardon, might I ask what you are doing here at this hour?" The figure hesitated, then turned. Moonlight revealed Mrs. Bradshaw's lined face, eyes wide with fear. Her apron was rumpled, her coiffure slightly disheveled. She opened her mouth, yet no words came. Instead, she gestured toward the ledger in his hands. "Monsieur," she said finally, voice quavering, "that book, Lady Beatrice insisted I hide it in her room for safekeeping. She feared its contents. I brought it here to retrieve it, but someone might have seen me." Poirot's brow furrowed. "Lady Beatrice? But earlier you told me the ledger never left Dr. Shaw's satchel." Mrs. Bradshaw's shoulders slumped. "I lied, to protect her." Before Poirot could reply, there came the unmistakable click of a door latch somewhere behind him, quick, mechanical, and deliberate. He turned to face the sitting room's entrance. A slender shadow detached itself from the darkness, advancing with purpose. "Give me the ledger," a low voice demanded. It was familiar, and yet disguised by the edge of desperation. Poirot's heart quickened. He braced himself behind the tea table, planting the ledger firmly against his chest. "Madam," Poirot said quietly, nodding toward Mrs. Bradshaw. "Leave us." The housekeeper did not hesitate. She bolted from the room, disappearing into the corridor as the chandelier above swung gently, unsettling the shadows. Poirot turned back to face the intruder, a tall figure leaning over the ledger-laden table. In one fluid movement, Poirot reached down for his cane. The assailant lunged, hand outstretched, and seized the ledger. Poirot planted his cane between the intruder's legs, forcing them to stumble. Yet the other hand found a weapon, a slender knife, its blade glinting in the firelight. The detective staggered back, pressing the ledger protectively to his side. The intruder smiled, a cruel, urgent smile, and raised the knife. Poirot hesitated only a moment before twisting aside, using his cane to deflect the blow. The rod snapped lightly against the blade's hilt, ringing through the room like a warning bell. "Mon Dieu," Poirot murmured, "you are desperate indeed." He planted his feet and jabbed the cane toward the attacker's chest, forcing them to relinquish the ledger. The knife clattered to the floor. The assailant stumbled back, cloak slipping from the shoulders. In the halo of firelight, Poirot saw the familiar features of Rosalind Harrington, her face pale, eyes blazing with panic and determination. She trembled, breath coming in sharp bursts, the stolen ledger clutched in her hands. "Mademoiselle!" Poirot exclaimed, lowering his cane. "Why resort to violence? You know this cannot end happily." Rosalind's mouth quivered. She raised the ledger defensively, as though it were a shield. "You don't understand, monsieur," she cried. "If that book leaves this room again, father's ruin will be complete. And worse, so will mine." Poirot advanced with cautious sympathy. "Rely on your own courage, mademoiselle. Violence only deepens the wound. Let us speak openly." He held out a hand. "Give me the ledger, and tell me what has driven you to this night's peril." Rosalind's eyes filled with tears. She lowered the ledger slowly and let it fall to the table with a soft thud. "I thought, if I held it too tightly, I could protect him. But I see now I only endangered us both." Poirot retrieved the ledger and closed its cover. He placed it in his coat pocket. "Come, let us sit," he said gently, gesturing to a pair of chairs by the fireplace. The intruder's anger drained, and she sank into a chair, trembling, gaze fixed on the dancing flames. Poirot sat opposite her, folding his hands. "Mademoiselle, you have walked a perilous path. Yet your greatest weapon is your reason, not a blade. Tell me, what moved you to this desperation?" Rosalind swallowed. "Father confessed to me this afternoon that he had taken the final sum to cover his losses. He feared disgrace above all, public ruin, and the end of Fernwood's legacy. I promised to protect him, to conceal the ledger until I could find a way to replace the missing amount. But when I learned you intended to present it to the coroner tomorrow, I panicked. I believed if I kept it, I alone could decide our fate." Poirot nodded gravely. "Fear is a powerful master. But your father is a proud man, he would rather face consequence than see his daughter break the law on his behalf." Rosalind bowed her head, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I know now I was wrong. I acted without thought." A distant clock chimed midnight. Poirot rose, offering a hand to help her stand. "Rest now, mademoiselle. Tomorrow, we shall set things right." He led her toward the door, pausing as they passed the window. Through the glass, the storm outside had broken, rain spattered across the pane, but within the manor, the night's tumult had yielded to a fragile calm. "Come, cher enfant," Poirot said in a softer tone. "Peace returns, even in the darkest hour." Rosalind allowed him to guide her from the sitting room, her steps unsteady but her head held a little higher. And as the door closed behind them with a soft click, Hercule Poirot stood alone once more, his little grey cells already turning, gathering the last pieces of this intricate puzzle, ready to reveal the final truth at dawn. Chapter 8: Poirot's Masterstroke. The first pale light of dawn seeped through the high windows of Fernwood Manor, illuminating the chill of apprehension that still clung to its corridors. In the library, candles flickered and servants hovered in the shadows, awaiting the final reckoning. At the center of the room stood Hercule Poirot, immaculate as ever, his moustaches perfectly waxed and his posture unshaken. Opposite him, the assembled household, Sir Lionel Harrington, Rosalind, Lady Beatrice, Dr. Evelyn Shaw, and Mrs. Bradshaw, watched with taut expressions. Poirot cleared his throat gently, and with a graceful gesture invited them to be seated. "Miss Amis," he began, "we have journeyed through deception, fear, and misdirection. Now, at last, I shall disentangle the web and reveal the truth that lies beneath the silence." He lifted the white glove from the silver tray on the side table. This glove, embroidered with RH, was found at the murder scene. It was placed there deliberately by Miss Harrington to mislead us. Yet the glove's silk fibers bore a microscopic trace of pearl-white paint. He held the glove aloft so that the morning light caught that telltale fleck. "That paint matches the hue used in the East Wing's new decoration, known only to those who handled the brushes." He paused, letting his gaze rest on Rosalind. Rosalind's hands trembled, but she met his eye. "Next," Poirot continued, "this scrap of ledger paper was found tucked in the gallery, details of a £2,300 payment to Sir Lionel dated the 3rd of April. These figures confirm that Mr. Morton had confronted Sir Lionel about embezzlement. Yet only two persons knew that precise date and amount, Mr. Morton himself, and his solicitor's daughter, Miss Harrington, accustomed as she is to negotiating commissions." He tapped the scrap against the palm of his hand. Miss Harrington hid this fragment in panic, hoping to buy time for her father. He turned to Lady Beatrice next. "You overheard a quarrel and then sought to influence its outcome by meeting Mr. Morton in the conservatory. You left footprints through the lodge grounds, clay marks inconsistent with your stated route. Your intention was to counsel him, yet your unannounced presence suggests a deeper interest in the ledger's contents." Lady Beatrice paled, but Poirot's gaze moved on. "Dr. Shaw discovered the ledger fragment but did not preserve the evidence. You claimed to protect the family's dignity, but in truth you sought to bury your professional critic's findings. Your linen fiancé's blouse fragment in the billiard room implicates you, but in fact it was carried there by the painted poker used to stage a false break-in." He laid the poker on the tray. "And Mrs. Bradshaw," he said gently, "the abrasion on the silver tray proves you entered the billiard room to prepare tea shortly before Mr. Morton's body was found. You attempted to hide your role out of loyalty to the family." All eyes turned to Sir Lionel. Poirot's tone grew soft. "Sir Lionel," he said, "in fear of financial ruin, you borrowed £2,300 from Mr. Morton. When he demanded a formal record, you feared exposure. On the afternoon of the murder, Mr. Morton confronted you in your study. In the struggle, you seized the nearest implement, a silver-handled letter opener, and struck him. The fatal blow pinned him to the billiard table." Sir Lionel bowed his head, voice thick. "It was not premeditated. He lunged for the drawer, I reacted." Poirot inclined his head sympathetically. Yet that moment of panic set in motion a cascade of deceit. Your daughter, out of filial devotion, sought to conceal your guilt. She planted the glove, the note, even attempted to poison him with the cracked teacup, hoping a threat would distract him from the ledger. Lady Beatrice, Dr. Shaw, and Mrs. Bradshaw, each drawn in by your daughter's red herrings, unwittingly became suspects. Rosalind's eyes filled. I was afraid of losing everything, our home, our name. I never meant him harm. Poirot gave her a kindly nod. Fear can compel the noblest heart to stray. But violence cannot protect. Your father's hand delivered the crime, yours wove the cloak of misdirection. He turned to the assembled guests. In sum, the method was as follows. The fatal blow, Sir Lionel, in self-defense, used the letter opener during a heated confrontation. The staged break-in, a painted poker and billiard cue misdirected suspicion to the gardener and Dr. Shaw. The planted evidence, the white glove, ledger fragment, cracked teacup, and cryptic note were placed by Rosalind to distract and delay. The disappearing ledger, a chain of custody was contrived, Dr. Shaw to Mrs. Bradshaw to Lady Beatrice, so the true evidence would vanish until too late. Thus, the real thread of guilt lay in paternal panic and filial protection. A stunned silence filled the room, broken only by the crackle of the dying candles. Sir Lionel rose, shoulders bowed but face resolved. I surrender myself to the authorities, he said quietly. I accept the consequences of my actions. Rosalind moved to his side, placing a trembling hand on his arm. Lady Beatrice and Dr. Shaw exchanged sorrowful glances. Mrs. Bradshaw curtsied, tears in her eyes. Poirot smiled gently. Monsieur, Mademoiselle, the law will take its course. But remember this, truth, though painful, brings freedom. Let this tragedy serve to bind you not in shame, but in renewed honesty. As the household prepared to summon the local constable, Poirot gathered his coat and hat. He gave one last look around the library, its walls now stripped of pretense. Fernwood Manor, he murmured to himself, will heal in time, so long as its inhabitants cherish truth above all else. With that, Hercule Poirot swept from the room, leaving behind a family forever changed, but relieved that the shadows of suspicion had at last been banished by his unrivaled method, meticulous attention to detail, and deep understanding of the human heart.